So our last speaker before lunch is Tom Stuart-Smith.
A lot of people. Isn't it wonderful? There's so many people interested in this. I mean, I think it's amazing there are so many people here. I'm going to tighten the focus a little bit. It was wonderful to have that macro view. I'm going to talk about gardens, and there are going to be lots of pictures of plants, just to sort of give you an appetite for lunch. And I want to start with probably the biggest project I've been involved in my life as a designer, which is this one here. This is Bridgewater, RHS Bridgewater. This is in 2017. I'd known the site for some time, actually, before, because it was owned by this very robust northwestern property developer called Peel. They couldn't get permission to do what they wanted with the site, which was to make a Ryder Cup golf course and to build a five-star hotel. And in the nick of time, the RHS came along with an incredibly enlightened local authority. So speaking to what we were just talking about, a local authority which, certainly in my part of the world, had a vision which is unimaginable. And Salford put £16 million into this project. The idea of St Albans District Council, where I come, putting 50p into the surroundings of the churchyard, it just seems completely foreign. But anyway, they did this, and they enabled this extraordinary project because they saw it as a way of bringing nature to the many, many people in Salford and Greater Manchester who do not have access to nature. And that was really enshrined in the master plan for the project, which was had a sort of garden design cocoon, if you like, in the sort of RHS mode. We are talking the Royal Horticultural Society, so we have to have quite a lot of plants. But surrounding this was actually this sort of carapace of community gardens, which make up a very major part of the garden. So I want to show you a little bit of, this is what the site looked like before. It was a historic house. The house was demolished in the 1940s, and there was this 11-acre wall garden, quite remote from the house, which had been used for productive horticulture. These are hedges of Leyland cypress, and this was an area which was full of nursery production, so it had every weed you can imagine in it. The garden, which was wonderfully transformed by Charlotte Harris and Hugo Bugg into the vegetable and foraging and garden, had incredibly high levels of arsenic because it had been a Victorian wall garden. It had a lot of problems, this site. But what it did have was it was 6 miles from the middle of Salford, and it's on this amazing mossland. So the soils are intrinsically rather amazing. So this is the master plan drawing. I had funding. This is about 8 foot long. And there was a wonderful moment at the RHS committee meeting where I was able to sort of roll it out on the table. And the principle of it was that the first phase of the garden would be the development of the wall garden, but the long-term vision, which has very much now been endorsed by Manchester City Council, Andy Burnham, and Salford, is that the site of the old house, which you can see overlooking the lake on the right of the picture, should be the site for a school of horticulture. And God, don't we need one? We need another one. So really the focus of my work was on the setting of the new visitor building, and then the development of the master plan and how people were going to move around the site. And a key to that was the idea that we would create a new lake that connected to the old lake, and this would be a way of, in the future, getting people through the core of the site because people love to follow a stream. This is another sketch looking at the slightly more of the close-up of the garden. Of course, one can always make a car park look very plausible by making it look more like an orchard, but it is a huge car park and a very expensive and difficult car park to make because it was over the moss, so a lot of stabilization of peat, very expensive, not very ecological, but a little unavoidable. And the building is located in this position where it's very close to the wall garden, but it leads people into the wider garden. This is an early sketch of the the heart of the walled garden. And you can see these two main compartments with the extraordinary boiler house of the old walled garden on the left with that huge chimney. And I was allowed to design the central piece, which is this paradise garden. I wanted to sort of revive the oldest trope in the history of enclosed gardens, which is the Persian paradise garden. And this was just a space filler. Apologies to Charlotte and Hugo for that, because it was before they were involved, of a vegetable garden. And then you can see this wraparound to the right and to the top, which are the community gardens, which are all run by, well, they're run by the RHS, but with a great number of volunteers. And actually, before the pandemic, so this would be a photograph taken in the middle of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, there were 750 volunteers involved at RHS Bridgewater, which was pretty incredible. And every time you go there would be a team of 40 clearing out the rhododendron ponticum, or there'd be another team of 20 working in the therapeutic garden, double digging it was really very, very impressive. And of course, quite relieved to know that's not the one going off in my pocket. Of course, COVID put a stop to this for a year, and the opening of the garden was delayed a year. And it was a real body blow to this build-up of community engagement, which had brought this amazing project into people's lives. I just want to show you some of what the garden is like. Now, this is a garden which is planned on very rectilinear basis. It's based on a Persian paradise garden. But I saw that it had to answer two very important demands. One is that I have this feeling, it may be a bit of a sort of gardener geeky feeling, that a lot of people, when they're in a garden, they want to have a certain amount of spatial privacy and a sense that they're engaging direct, not with the 300 other people who are in the garden, but with the materiality of the garden itself. So actually having a very complex web-like layout lends itself to this. It also lends itself to huge complexity, and I mean, we're at a Rewilding conference. Why wouldn't one be a passionate advocate of complexity? But I really did set myself the challenge of trying to make this planting as complex as I reasonably could. And actually, in the planting which we did at Bridgewater, there are just over 1,000 taxa of plants, which is quite a lot to fit into a garden. And I think you can only really do this if you have a very fragmented layout. And that means that the other great thing about a fragmented layout, a sort of web layout, is that kind of in a way everybody has their own different way of experiencing the garden. You know, if you have an enfilade, if you have a sort of formal kind of grand scheme with big open spaces and big sweeping beds, and there's probably 3, 4, 5 ways to go around it. If we take the example of Rousham, that amazing garden in Oxfordshire, or many of the gardens that are created by people who love plants, which are fragmented, then suddenly, by creating a web way of going around a garden, the ways you can experience this thing are infinitesimally complex, and there is no way around the garden. If anybody ever asks me about which is the way I'm supposed to go around your garden, I say, don't ask me. That's part of the experience. You've got to decide for yourself. And I think that these gardens should be designed in a way that somebody discovers them. They're not told how to look at them. They're not told how to enter them, where to go, what to do. They just move through a space and then are led on to different experiences. And that is part of trusting your audience and actually letting them have the primary experience, not trying to mediate this thing too much. So actually, all these photographs look relatively disorganized, and I'm pretty happy about that. But there's a sort of underlying logic to the layout, and in many ways, that's the kind of tension that we create as designers. That tension between chaos and order. That there may be underneath it all, and there probably is, some underlying structure which somebody can stand back and look at. But actually, it's much better if it's not perceptible on the face. That this is something that people can get to when they've gone into the sort of granular nature of the composition. It's not confronting them right from the outset. So more lovely photographs, I think, these are from Jason Ingram just this year, showing how in 2 years this garden has really, really developed. And this is part of the Mediterranean aspect. I gave myself a constraint of planting the Paradise Garden biogeographically. So 1/3 of it is Asian, 1/3 of it is American, 1/3 of it is Mediterranean, in the broadest sense of the Mediterranean categorization. And in this garden, we incorporated 6 inches of grit into the top. I'd be very happy to have planted it through the grit, as opposed we can have lots of grit sand conversations later, I'm sure we will. But what it does is it just suddenly, diversity explodes. You know, if you impoverish the soil, you just get greater diversity and greater complexity of vegetation. Of this, I am convinced and passionate advocate. And it makes gardening so much more interesting if you can have 10 species per square metre rather than 1. In the Asian part of the garden, which is largely devoted to sort of Chinese, Vietnamese, Japanese plants, we took the view that the primary kind of language would be of semi-woodland and quite well-fed soils. And generally, yes, we get like, 1 species per square metre, 1 species per 2 metres. And it has a kind of aesthetic of its own, but it's, you can see something. So this is a planting plan of the Mediterranean garden. And you can see it's pretty complex. Most of these clumps would be 1 metre or less, and then there's an overlay of other species through them. So some of those green spots, I don't know what on earth they are, but they might be, let's say, Santalinas planted through time. So there are several layers of complexity in the planting. And it was really quite traumatic for me that I didn't, it's the first project I've ever done where I didn't set out a single plant, because it was all in COVID. I wasn't allowed to go. And fortunately, I'd actually been, quite disciplined about this and had done extremely accurate planting plans, which the RHS followed with amazing, meticulous exactness. And so it didn't really matter that much. In fact, they did a wonderful job, and probably much better than if I had been up there setting it out myself, I should think. Then the other part of the garden is the sort of the bigger open space around. This is the visitor building, which I think is a very successful, quite green building. It looks a bit like a sort of airport in sort of a minor Finnish provincial city, perhaps, but it's a very airy space of welcoming lots of people in, and then they come through this. Some people may recognize this space frame thing from a sort of precursor garden I did at Chelsea to sort of, to hype the whole idea of Bridgewater being around the corner, and then it kind of wasn't around the corner because it was delayed by a year. And the planting here, this is on the peat, so it's bigger groups, bolder groups of planting. Things like, you can see Veronocastrums, Lithrums, Euphorbias, that kind of thing. Things that inevitably are going to occupy a given space. They like a particular type of soil. Not a lot of point in trying to impoverish the soil. And again, you can see on a bigger scale than in the garden, in the walled enclosure, this kind of web pattern. This is actually based on a Voronoi pattern, which some of you know. Imagine a giraffe skin, which can be calculated by a mathematical formula of taking points, and then the paths are effectively equidistant between the points. A bit more elaborate than that, but that's the sort of basic schema. And it means that this garden can absorb a lot of people who have the illusion that they're in an environment, on their own, connecting with this place, not looking at the back of 30 other people who got there before them. So this is, I'm going to talk about 3 projects in the north of England. It seemed to be a period of time when I was working a lot in the north. That is about as unwild as you can get. So that's a 1940s photograph, aerial photograph of the River Calder in Wakefield. And the site of the Hepworth Gallery, David Chipperfield's gallery, is pretty much next to that bridge, on that sort of little promontory of land that comes forward you can see the big weir and the bit of land I don't think I have a pointer. I hope I could describe it. That little tongue of land that comes forward to the weir. And the bit of land that we had to play with was the slice of land there, completely covered by buildings, between that and those rather impressive mill buildings. And nature had been, you can see nature as it was around the gallery. Generally confined to Himalayan balsam and a few willow trees along the river. And the site of the garden, which was the back of the gallery, was typical municipal landscape. And this was never intended to be a public open space. When the gallery was built, it was always envisioned that this would be built on. But the gallery made this incredibly impressively bold move. And it'd be interesting, I'd love to know other examples of this. So this is an institution, okay, it's largely funded by Arts Council, by the local authority, by private donations. They decided they wanted to take ownership of this space. So they talked to the local council and said, we're going to raise a bunch of money, and we are going to curate this space, and it's going to be a free 24/7 garden for the people of Wakefield and the people who are visiting the gallery, and it's going to be part of our extended museum space. And the only other example I can think of this, I think it probably happens in Europe the whole time, but the only other one which I hope happens is the one that Dan is working on at the Garden Museum, Lambeth Green, where the Garden Museum has done a similar thing with Lambeth. They've said, we're living in a bit of a shit heap, let's do something about it. Let's transform our environment. And that's what the Hepworth did. And it's a pretty bland space. That's all that happened in it. There was one diagonal path across it. Amazingly, that little shed in the distance is a listed building. I'm not referring to the thing on the big thing as a listed shed, but that is also listed. So we had to keep that as now a little coffee bar. And I started looking actually at Barbara Hepworth's sculpture to find a sort of language because I felt sandwiched in between this very powerfully architectural museum and this mill building. This garden couldn't just be a doormat. It also had to have a pretty strong language of its own. And this is the least wild of all the gardens I'm going to show you. And I think there is a reason for that. That Wakefield is not a very wild city. It's a city. It's got a very fine town centre. The area where the gallery is pretty degraded. It's got the river running through it, which is amazing. But it has a lot of sheds, a lot of garages, and it has a 6-lane highway going past one end. And there is very little nature literacy in the community around it. So it probably was never going to be a site for a rewilded, wild kind of garden. It always wanted to be something that was quite structured, quite designed, perhaps. That would be what I would say. Or maybe in 20 years' time it could be more wilded, as we begin to change our views on these things. I think we're on a journey, aren't we? It all started with Pete Adolf telling us we could love dead plants, and we're loving it all piled on top of each other. So this is a Barbara Hepworth sculpture, torso in the Hepworth collection, and I was interested in looking at the language of everything being unparalleled. This sort of awkward, clunky naturalism that. This is a very atypical Barbara Hepworth, because, of course, most of her stuff is abstract, but this is a very early piece. And I started looking at the language of, this is the kind of crumpled box language of the architecture, and trying to find a kind of an intermediate language that had, as it were, the sort of softened architecture of the building, in a way, and came up with this sort of patchwork language of spaces. Now, some of these spaces are planted, some of them are hard so that they can have different sort of events in them. Some of them are little lawns so that families can have picnics. Okay, that seems, in my language, it's a bit didactic to sort of say, you're going to sit here and have a picnic. But, this is quite a small space. It's 40 meters wide, 120 meters long, something like that. So it's not a big garden. But I think because it's so out of place, and that's part of the excitement of it. We always talk about things being in place and being of the spirit of the place. This is definitely not. This is absolutely not. It couldn't be more out of place. You don't see gardens like this in the middle of Wakefield, and that's part of its power because it's so unexpected. And part of the key thing of it, this is a sketch I did of the garden, was that we needed to make it actually a separate space. So the most controversial aspect of this garden was a 4-meter-high in situ concrete wall that we put along the highway to block out the highway from the road, because without this, you were just on a motorway verge. Just impossible. And actually, somebody in the planning department did try to stop us when we were in the middle of constructing this wall. Tried to put all sorts of of obstructions in our way, which caused a 9-month delay for construction and cost the gallery and the fundraisers about £100,000. Completely disgraceful malfunctioning of the planning system. Actually, not planners. It was an engineer. So you're saved. We love planners. You know that. I don't know whether any of them know this one. I always think about it when I think about planners and architects and how we all relate to each other. That wonderful Freudian phrase about the narcissism of minor differences. How architects are at the top, like sort of, starry gods. Then there are town planners. Then some way below them, there are landscape architects. Then there are gardeners on the bottom. And actually, the more we do in our lives to invert that so that gardeners at the top and then landscape designers somewhere below them and then... So I'm going to show you some. There are obviously a lot of gardeners here. So some photographs of this is actually in its first year. So this was in the lockdown year, and a lot of the success. I don't know if Katie's here. Is Katie here? Katie is here. Wonderful. Okay. Well, Katie's a star. A lot of the success of this garden I put down to having a great gardener who was there throughout lockdown. And when this place could have been this mysterious arrival from outer space, suddenly was this space identified with a person. Not me, absolutely not, but with Katie, because she was there every day, and people would come to the garden, and they would say things like, in July, "Oh, Katie, you changed all the planting, I talk about the level of, plant literacy. People literally thought that she had, over the weekend, taken all the plants out and brought another lot in because different ones were in flower. And they had no conception that this could happen in a garden. I mean, quite surprising. And she was obviously such a star that people would bicycle from Bolton with ice creams for her, which would be rather horribly melted by the time they arrived. So there I think you maybe see some of this sort of the awkward naturalism of the typology that I was talking about, the way that paths are not parallel. Maybe there are places where a path swells, which suggests, that people might stop and have a chat. There are places where it's narrow, where you shuffle past. But there are lots of just random different opportunities. And of course, the garden is a setting for sculpture. What's rather nice is that it's a rotating exhibition. And it was beautiful when they had the amazing Barbara Hepworth show last year, that they filled the garden with her sculptures. And that sort of felt like a real, kind of coming home. And I think that in winter, autumn and winter, like all our gardens, because Katie leaves everything standing, it does take on this wilder, more sort of slightly feral thing. And I think that because people have got used to they've had the tulips, very nice and ordered. Wakefield, of course, is the city of the oldest tulip society in Britain, so it's very important to have tulips. And then the sort of tidiness and the very organized nature of the planting really in summer, and then in winter and autumn and winter, it really starts to sort of fall apart and become. There's the infamous wall after a shower of rain, and in winter it really does start to feel quite wild. And I'd be interested. I mean, maybe Katie can comment on this at some point. Whether the response to this kind of aesthetic is mediated by the fact that people can connect it to the previous, the summer look. If you just presented this, I think a lot of people who've lived in a city all their life would just think, this is just dead. This is just awful. What's going to happen? And there, in case you want to mob her in the interval, there's Katie in amongst the echinaceas doing her bit. So this is at a rather different social scale, I suppose. So this is Chatsworth, where Dan and I have been, not working together, but we've both been doing stuff there now for the Duke and Duchess. I say for the Duke and Duchess. The thing that is, I think, most remarkable about Chatsworth is the social philosophy that goes with it, in that I think they regard themselves as custodians of this great place, and they regard themselves as custodians of the sort of public, the sort of public inheritance of the place. The place has 700,000 visitors a year. It is a public place. And they, remarkably, this landscape, which so many of us know, has these heroic, extraordinary bones, but actually relatively little detail. It was not a place you went to I mean, you went there for these sublime vistas of hills and the dreaded sheep and all, but you didn't go there for a sort of close connection with sort of small-scale beauty, perhaps. Other than in the house, which of course has great sort of works of art, there wasn't that parallel in the house and in the landscape, and that's really what our project has been about. There've been two projects really. One, this is Chatsworth from the air. It's this sort of heavier green area above the sort of central axis, the central Baroque garden. I showed that previous picture. I didn't say anything about it. That's the Sybarex view, which is 1790. Sorry, only 100 years out, 1699, showing the great formal garden done by the second Duke, which was then sort of rough and tumbled by Capability Brown, and then Paxton came along in 1840 and just sort of broke all the rules, and he made this completely crazy rockery, which was not a rockery in a Victorian sense of the word. It was intended as a kind of simulacrum of landscape, so very much ahead of its time in a way, and should be considered much more in terms of the picturesque rather than in terms of Victorian rock gardening. And it's in this area, if you see the round pond pretty much in the middle of it, which is part of the Baroque garden. And this, if you walked up from the round pond, this is how you used to experience the rockery. So it was a kind of culture clash. You came out of this Baroque garden and you arrived at this kind of, it just looked as if giants had played, chuck around after a drunken party. I mean, it was just not very great. And the way the two worlds met, of the polite, linear, axial 17th century and the rumbustious mid-19th century, it was just a car crash. And so quite a lot of what we were doing in the rockery was about making the experience much more dramatic and intense and close, and also making this transformation, the way you experienced it and arrive at it from the landscape, very, very different and more exciting. So this is when you arrive from the house. You walked along this path, 3.5 meters wide, with these York stone edges. You might as well be dressing in a crinoline. You don't get to within sort of 10 yards of plant unless it's geranium Johnson's blue. You have your purple corner on the right, the azaleas on the left, the little trio of junipers. It's all very composed and gardeny. And what our strategy was to make it, immersive is an overused word, but to make it more a piece of scene setting. So to use things on a very big scale and to think about it much more in terms of the picturesque, in terms of painterliness, and the sense that you would just come into this garden and you would just be on a different planet. And there was nothing to sort of push it back like there is here. The fact that this is a straight path just seems to me strange. We did have these rather amazing historical records in photographs of what it was like at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. This is the Wellington Rock, where water in a frost with all the water frozen. So that was an interesting thing to go on. And that showed that actually Paxton did plant it with a lot of native plants and then put in a lot of things like cotoneasters. Not terribly exciting, really, I think. And then it sort of, it moved over the years. And so I was looking at these two entrances. This is the one I showed you up from the ring pond, the one which came from the Baroque garden. The idea that you would come into this space with a sort of dramatic portal of rocks. And you would suddenly, it would just be like yes, okay, it's a bit theme parky, but there'd be a moment when you would be transported away from your normal life into some completely different area. And the way we worked on this to convince them that it was a good idea is we made a model out of clay to show how, so you could really imagine what it was going to be like to be in this dramatic space. And then this was the other view I showed you, the one with the demure little York stone edges by the side of the path. Get rid of those. Put a bend in the path. You have to arrive in this place, and you can't just drive straight on, as if nothing has happened. You've got to put something in people's way, so they are literally arrested by what's going on, and they have to sort of go around it. I think, gardens where we are so polite that we don't, it's all health and safety, isn't it? But where we don't make people duck under trees, where we don't make people have to touch stuff, it's pretty depressing. So this is a view in the middle of when we started our planting, and I mean I should have said it with the Hepworth, you know, where Katie has a great team of volunteers. At Chatsworth, all this planting was done by the garden team, but couldn't have happened without their team of volunteers. They have about 75 volunteers who go there regularly and are really increasingly sort of an essential part of the team. And for those horticulturalists amongst us, we might be interested in the way we went around this. We did use the dreaded ROUNDUP to kill off what was here initially. And I think it'd be quite hard to imagine doing what we did without it. We couldn't have smothered it with plastic or got pigs in, you know, while you've got a garden open for 600,000 people. So we killed it off, and then we spread green waste. We'd never touched the soil, never dug anything, because this is on a sort of stony, shaly ground, difficult ground. And so we put a layer of 6 inches of green waste, and then always planted directly into that. Sometimes with problems, some species don't particularly like it, but it also means that if you're asking volunteers to plant, you're not asking them to break their wrists by planting into something which is difficult. So this is in the first year. Again, this was a path that went straight through before, so we've blocked that all off. So you make it impossible for people to walk in straight lines behind other people. People are confronted by things, they have to go different routes. They have to discover for themselves, make up their own decisions about where they're going to go. There is no route. This is, I think, just in the end of the first year. So I just show you some examples about how it does create a sort of kind of a separate world, which is pretty exciting. And still, you know, the children climb all over the rocks, they jump off them. That's accepted as part of the, you know, part of the thing. God alone knows what it looks like now after 4 months of no rain. I mean, it's completely unheard of in the Peak District not to have any rain over summer. I showed this one because we then after the Rockery we did this project called Arcadia, which is a very meaningful word in a way, because it's about, you know, the desire we all have in our lives to have this other place, you know, to go to somewhere where the normal norms of life don't seem to matter. And I think Chatsworth does do this big time, you know, as do so many of the sort of great gardens of the world. You're just taken into another world. And most of the people in this shot are volunteers working on the planting. We organized this a year in advance, and we decided we would do this planting, which is about 25,000 plants. We decided we'd do it. We had the time to do it peat-free and plastic-free. But it was a real sweat. So you have to get, you know, so you've got to get the big growers like the Rijnbeeks of this world in Holland. You've got to be a whole year in advance to say you are going to grow them in these pots, which we will source for you because they don't have them. Unfortunately, they are rice pots supplied from China. They seem to be the only people. I mean, maybe there are now alternatives. I'm sure this is going to be a gap that's filled in the market, but it's not a gap that's easy to. Because coir doesn't really work because everything roots through it, and then you can't pick up the pot. So about 30% of all the planting here was bare root, which of course is a fantastic. You know, we all ought to use much more bare root planting. Very difficult in a contractual municipal setting, but in private gardens we just ought to try and do that much more. It's just so much lower carbon and more efficient, and most of the time you get a better plant. And then all the rest of actually I can see some plastic pots in the foreground. But I promise you that about 95% of all the plants in it were grown in these little dinky rice pots, which last for about a year and a half. And this is not actually the plastic-free glade. This is one of the glades of shame made with plastic pots. But what it is given as these very, very extensive, I think the area of planting there, I think it's probably several hectares of planting. And then there's one glade where James Hitchmore, who I collaborate with a lot, has done a seeded glade, which last time I saw it was just full of buttercups, but he assures me is going to be fantastic. And this is the 100 Steps glade. You can see big drifts of Iris sibirica and, I mean, quite simple things. This is quite early on in the year. But it gives this planting on a scale that is just, who used the word awe about butterflies? I mean, it is rather wonderful to see to be in a landscape of this kind of scale. I think also there's something really remarkable which we've not really touched on anybody yet, and I think is particularly important in the context of the Hepworth garden, is the importance of care and looking after spaces. And that can be a problem with the whole wilding, debate. That wilding, as an aesthetic concept, is quite a sophisticated sort of 21st century one. And for a lot of people, in a pretty gritty urban context where the other is not a beautifully manicured front garden, but is actually just a derelict, sidewalk full of rubbish. The rewilded look is still quite challenging. And to have a garden which is quite evidently beautifully looked after sometimes has a very, very key place in our psychology and our sort of, the context of where we live. If everything is this sort of, this kind of guardsman mentality where you just try to make it look as if nothing, no effort, hasn't been an effort at all. Oh, it just happens, which seems to be a lot of what our gardening style is about. You just want to make it look seamless and effortless, despite the fact that it's a bloody sweat. Actually, seeing a garden that is quite evidently, intensively maintained for production or for beauty is a very beautiful thing, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. And a lot of that beauty is just simply that you're aware that somebody is looking after it, and it's cared for and loved by people, and it's a complete connection with society, rather than this slightly more abstract Elysian concept, shown here. And this is the view looking in the other direction. And another one, there we are, looking down. I mean, part of the project was about opening up these views over the Derbyshire landscape, so that instead of what it was before, this walk in the woods with these very beautiful, but it was a sort of slightly more of the same, you suddenly have these, what Capelody Brown would have called bursts, when you're walking along in a woodland, and then suddenly the thing opens out, and you see this incredible landscape opening out in front of you. So the last proper project I'm going to talk about is when do I turn into a pumpkin or fairy?
I'm looking at 13, 14, sir.
13, 14. Yeah. Okay, right, great. So the last project is not this one, but this was a means to how we got there. I met Charlie Burrell, I think, about 10 years ago, because we both simultaneously had a really, really bad idea, which we thought was a really good idea, which was to scan one of the oaks in Windsor Great Park and then put it up in the middle of the city. It's kind of quite a beautiful idea in a way, but then we didn't really think about the sort of carbon footprint and the fact that it would be a bit weird to do a project about trying to connect people to nature, which actually involved, sort of 150 tons of bronze and a carbon footprint about the size of a herd of elephants. So we realized and also that didn't the Wobbly Bridge teach us a lesson, perhaps? I mean, it would have been an amazing thing, but the way it was handled, it came across as this sort of, the noblesse bestowing this thing on a public who should be very, very grateful, thank you. And it was a bit of a shock when I remember walking through that bit of South London, just south of the bridge, and seeing almost every doorway had this thing saying no to the bridge, and you just thought, shit, this is, something has gone wrong here in just the handling of this as an idea, which in many ways, is quite sad, because I think it could have been an amazing project. I'm sure lots of views on this. Anyway, so we realized that to plonk a lump of bronze in a big city was not a very good idea. If the idea of it was to bring greater awareness to people about, we were both interested in making people aware of the decline of forests and the crisis of trees. Fortunately, we realized it was a bad idea in time. And we mutated this concept into an idea of setting up a group of people who would support the idea of using art to promote connection to nature, and working particularly with Miles Richardson at University of Derby, who has all the metrics on this. We managed to cobble together enough money in collaboration with Yorkshire Sculpture Park to commission this amazing work, if you're ever in Yorkshire, you have to go and see it. It's a sublime, it's like if you can imagine, it's like a Buddhist temple for nature. And it's a circular space built out of entirely biodegradable materials by Ivan and Morrison and Heather Peake, to artists based in Wales. All the wood is from their own plantation. The heather came from some moorland somewhere. And the base is rammed earth built from all the excavations of other sculptures installed on YSP where they had to dig it out to put these massive concrete footings in. So this is a community gathering space built around a clump of trees, which will gradually rot down into the ground. It's the only picture I've got of it off the website at 6:30 this morning when I suddenly thought, that is the link. And it's a project about bringing people together in nature and getting them to be quiet. The project is called Silence, which sort of says it all. You go into this space, and immediately your blood pressure goes down. You sit down. There's just a clump of trees in there, but it's just a homage to this ordinariness of this piece of nature. Anyway, so we have been talking a lot about this, and then one day he said to me, "Look, I think Izzy and I have just Isabella Tree." Who he's married to, a bit confusing, isn't it? Charlie Burrell, Isabella Tree, the power couple. So the big embarrassment, we all have embarrassments hidden away. Mine is my compost heap, I think, probably. Their big embarrassment was their walled garden. The rest of Knepp is just pretty astonishing. And then you go behind the walled garden. This is not what you expect. The sort of mown lawn, the neatly clipped box, the croquet lawn, and the worst bit is behind you, the swimming pool, chlorine, everything. Just amazingly, this had rare spiders in it. So we sort of sat down a bit and thought about what do you do if you're going to rewild this kind of space? Amazingly, this is two wall gardens, so we could do two different things. And we had this very, very august committee. So we had Mick Crawley, who some of you will know, professor of ecology at Imperial College, amazing man, known at Knepp as God, because he knows everything. When I first met him, I said, I've got 6 minutes. Is that right? Yes. He said, "Where do you live, Tom?" And I said, "Well, I live near Watford," which I always do when I'm trying to be a bit disingenuous. It sounds much better than St Albans. And he said, "Well, where near Watford?" "Well, near Bedmond." "Where near Bedmond?" "Well, down Sergial Lane." "Ah, you know that little clump of white Viola odorata on the verge?" I mean, he is a nutcase. And he's doing this flora of 25 miles around London, and he literally, knows things to that level of detail. It's pretty overpowering. Anyway, so he was on our committee, and James Hitch, and me, and Charlie and Izzy, and we decided that what we should do is make there are two separate garden spaces. This is a Nash castle, a walled garden built slightly after that time. The garden on the left, which was largely designed 10 years ago by a very good designer called Georgina Langton, and had all the paths laid out, that we would just really rough it up. And it would be a garden about foraging and about soil health and productivity. And we'd just sort of give it a good, as if it spent the night in the bushes, as it were. And that's probably a rather loose description of it. And then the other one would be about floral biodiversity, and that we would just cram as much stuff in there as we possibly could, and then see how it got along with itself. And the central point is that you cannot achieve floral biodiversity on a flat croquet lawn. So we made it into a moonscape. So we built up hills. There was a farm which they were demolishing, so we got 300 cubic meters of crushed concrete build up these hills and to, as a sort of layer to plant into. So in some areas we're planting into 8 inches of crushed concrete. Then we generally modify that with a bit of sand, so there's not so much risk of the concrete sticking together, which it can do. And then we went down up to nearly 2 meters. So there's a 3.5 meter height difference, I think. So sorry, that was a little sketch to sort of show the idea of doing a sketch of a rewilding garden is mad, really, because I mean it's going to go the way it's going to go, but you know it's nice to have an image. And I had a bit of time to spare at Christmas, so I sort of thought. So this is a garden. This is a plan of the productive garden where we think we invented the concept of the dirty path. So we changed all the lawns because they were all. You saw those lawns in the picture. We took the lawns out and then we actually just put crushed limestone on top of the soil, and then planted through the middle section would be a pure path, you know, so it doesn't grow into a forest. But then the sides were this path through which all the herbs would grow. So really, really nice growing medium for the soils. And then we took out all the raised beds, made them into no-dig beds. And this is an aerial photograph of it in very early days. So you can see the no-dig beds on the right. And the dirty paths are this sort of thing which looks as if it's breaking out into a sort of rash, with all these you know herbs which don't like growing in soil, much happier growing in a path. And this is it early in the. I think all these are a mixture of Charlie Harper, who's now running the garden there. Charlie used to work for me, and he abandoned me to go and work at Knepp. I'm still getting over it, but. And so this is a photograph of the productive garden. You can see not a lot of production going on there, but I mean, the productive bit is actually, you can see the pea sticks in the distance. There we are in the evening light. And this is a drawing showing, the top half is the croquis lawn as found, and the bottom half shows you the hot bits on the top where we can grow agaves and all sorts of sort of Mexican stuff. You know, that's why you get James Hitchmore involved, because he gets plants in that you've never even heard of. And then we've got these sort of low sunken bits like Area 3, which had a meter, 3/4 meter of water in it over winter. Of course, now completely baked dry. What plant can cope with that? And here we are, sort of the aerial photograph looking at this kind of moonscape, very, very exciting kind of moonscape. And there we are in the wider context of Knepp. And this is what it's beginning to look like. Pretty hairy. And Charlie has the role of the disturbance agent in rewilding terms. So he's there to make all these micro decisions about what. Have I had the hand yet? 2, right. Okay. He's there to make all these sort of micro decisions about what survives, what doesn't survive, allowing quite a lot of annuals to come in, feed plants for various. He would describe this so much better than me. He now does these rewilding safaris through the garden, and there he is. Look, with this chaos unfurling behind him. So in my last 2 minutes, I'm going to talk about a very, very unwild project, which is about a kind of wider social rewilding that Sue and I are doing. Sue Stuart Smith is over there, could talk later, that we're doing at our home. We got planning permission about 3 years ago to make a community garden on some land that I bought from my sister. And so we decided, after a number of false starts, that the centerpiece of this garden was going to be this concept of a plant library. So at the moment, it's a collection of about 1,000 plants. And the reason why we did this is to do with what I was talking a little bit about, what I was talking about earlier, about webs and nets, that it's a non-hierarchical system. As soon as you're looking after somebody's garden that they've designed, there's an implicit hierarchy in it. You know, there's the designer up here telling people what to do. The glory about this system is it's just a collection. And 2/3 of it's planted through sand, through 6 inches of sand. So it's like being on the beach. At the moment, we have 15 volunteers. It's still a building site, as you can see. This is the kind of community resource center, you just describe it as, where we will have, we'll do a number of things. We'll have everything from people who are working in horticultural therapy coming here to meet. We might have local people coming to do a yoga night. We'll have my team, my staff, colleagues will use it as a great learning tool, and we'll have parties in there. But primarily, it's about engaging people who might otherwise feel that they don't know much about plants or are afraid of plants, to get them familiar with it. And a key part of it is that we're going to set up this nursery with an amazing local charity called Sunnyside, who works with autistic and particularly autistic and Asperger's adults, who will propagate plants from the garden and other plants from seed, and then maybe sell them back to us or our clients or back into the system. So there's a kind of circularity. And the garden can become this kind of shared focus for, social coming together. But also just bringing nature, okay, in quite a structured way. But we are in this crazy place where we have 380,000 people living within 8 miles of us, thanks to green belt laws, but almost nobody within a mile of us. We live in this lovely bit of landscape, and it's completely unequitable, which is why we're doing this project. So I hope this is a kind of little model. I think you could do these things, but they ought to be in the middle of cities. The RHS should be doing projects like this. Without our great institutions and our planning departments actually initiating this kind of thing, we don't stand a chance. So I hope that there's people might take up the initiative in these worlds, and this could be a little model for something like that in the future. Thank you very much. I've stayed my way.